Welcome everyone to the Voice of Terminus show. I'm Yanila, joined by Lex. Say hello, Lex.
Hello.
Josh couldn't be with us today. The fake Josh, as far as Vaad sees it. But we have Vaad with us as our special guest to sit down and join into the discussion on raiding mechanics, which we'll get into in a minute. Say hello, Vaad.
Hello.
And in the background, we have the lovely Shy with us again, representing from the background with a whiplash, putting us into place when needed. Say hello, Shy.
Hello.
And we have Zath also in chat, representing again, doing his awesome mod job. And we have you guys as well. Welcome
that
to
sounded dirty.
Hey!
That's a mod job.
Anyway, welcome to 2019, everyone. We hope you got in well. And we're back at it to entertain you guys while we all enjoy the ride and wait for Pantheon to finally hit Alpha, the next big stage that they're going for. But today's discussion, we're going to talk about raiding mechanics. We had Vaad on the show last year. We did an interview with him, and this is one of the shows that we kind of it kind of basically exploded out of the discussion. And yeah, so we're here to talk about raiding mechanics, look at ways how the dispositions and behaviours of the NPCs can impact a raid and influence how we approach raids. We're going to look at raid sizes, because there's been quite a bit of chatter on Twitter about the raid sizes. We're going to look at smart AI after having Zippy Z, one of the devs on our show, and getting an insight into how their AI is kind of going to be a bit smarter than what we usually know. We're going to look at ways for the AI to kind of take on certain responsibilities when it comes to bringing raiding into a larger scale, because we also want to address and look at raiding in general. We know that Pantheon's going to be a group focused, the core focus is going to be on grouping. Raiding's going to be kind of like a companion that basically follows you along, and there's Mr. Kitty. Follows you along throughout your experience in the game. And there's a lot of raiding guilds out there, and we want to still kind of find a way for them to have that competitiveness, that challenge, but also see if there's a means and interest or even ways to bring in those smaller guilds that might want to raid. And ways for that to happen, for them to get a glance of what raiding is all about. Because if we look at all the games of the past, the past 2 decades when it comes to MMOs, and we look at the raiding aspect, that's the elite status. That's what the elitists do. People are called the elitists when they raid. It's a whole different community on the side. It's a complete different part of the game. There's a major divide when it comes to the raiding aspect of an MMO and the rest of it. You've got like the crafters, you've got the raiders, you've got the normal people in between. And with a game like Pantheon that's so heavy on socialization, getting people together, I wanted to talk about personally how to bring raiding to a larger scale and bring it to basically everyone without breaking the core competitiveness between the major raid forces. Anyway, that's the discussion topics for today. So let's go and get raid sizes out of the way, because
Size matters.
So far I've seen a lot of tweets on Twitter as well, where a lot of people are confirming that VR have stated that the raid sizes will be between 12 and 24 man groups. So basically, 4 groups of 6 or 2 groups of 6 basically will be, that'll be the bare minimum. So you need, 2 groups to form a raid, or a maximum of 4 groups to form a raid. What are your guys' intake on that? Do you think that's a good number to start with? Do you think that there's ways to expand it? Obviously, there's a lot of things that come into effect when you're designing your raids, especially with a game like Pantheon, with what we've seen, the visualization of the game, with all the spell visuals and everything. I could see it being hard on the systems if they go any bigger. I mean, EverQuest had what, 72 man raids?
Yeah.
So, what do you think about these sizes? 24 kind of basically snuck itself in as a standard in the mid-2000s. you know, when EverQuest 2 came out and stuff like that, basically, that's where they formed around 24 being a reasonable raid size. And what's your take on the raid sizes? Do you think those are good numbers? Would you like to see something differently done with it? And we'll start with you, Vaad.
Okay. So one of the tenets for Pantheon is that it's supposed to be a game of tactfulness, strategy, you know, working together. So I think if you get a raid too large, you're going to become more just a drone in the system, a gear in the machine. Whereas if you 12 to 24, I could see still having value. So how many classes are in the game? 12?
Quite a few.
There's basically, they start off with 12, but it's officially
Right.
14 right now with the Bard and Necro on the fence, you know, for, you know, post-launch, pre-launch, whatever.
Right. So even with save this for whatever reason, you had one of each for a 12-man, or for 24 you get two of each. You could still have your star players for those classes being the people in the raid, you know, and they still feel like, hey, I'm contributing a unique aspect of my class to the completion of this raid. So I think it's a good way for them to balance the different dispositions and behaviors through the other environment things while keeping people active.
Lex, what about you?
I'm pretty much really close to the same path, because the more people you get in a raid, the less each individual slot tends to matter.
Yeah.
For instance, you know, back in the day with 72-man raids, if you lost 10 people, it wasn't that big of a deal. You know, where going back to, say, my WoW days, when you were doing a 10 or a 24 or 25-man Naxxramas, when you lost 2 or 3 people, it was a huge deal. Oh God, just wipe and start over.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm a fan of the smaller raids simply because each person matters more. It depends on how much strategy. Oh God, I almost said strategery. How much strategy is needed for a lot of the raids, because you know there is a learning curve to this kind of thing, which is why it's usually an elitist. Not necessarily, but I want to say this about 60% correct statement of saying that raiding is usually an elitist type of activity. Not 100% accurate. Simply because the strategy does make the learning curve very steep at times. And when you have, you know, possibly different people every time, week in and week out, you tend to get stuck in this rotation of trying to teach people how to do something, but never actually get through it.
Yeah.
Which gets frustrating for the people that come every time. The 12-man, if there's actually 12-man raids, I think I would enjoy that, because those to me kind of stream like it's more of a, you know, just get a few people and go.
Yeah.
Versus 24 or even a 72-person raid. I mean, who out there that played EverQuest or similar games that had large-scale raids sat at your computer literally for an hour or 2 hours, sometimes 3, just waiting for the raid to form?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, that's I can't do that no more. If I'm sitting around for an hour, I'm out. You know?
Yeah.
So I like the 12-mans.
That also plays into, you know, one of the things too, that if you're playing it for a window of 2 to 3 hours, right? If that's what you have to play, that makes it a lot easier, like you said, to just pick up and go.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, a 12-man raid is a little more pug friendly. For those that don't know, pug pickup group.
I never knew that.
Well, some people don't.
I actually never knew that. That's crazy.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
No, I actually didn't know what that meant.
I taught somebody something. So you could have a group of your close friends who are all very skilled players, and then pick up another group of people you're not really 100% sure about, And you could still stride into a raid feeling fairly confident.
Mm.
With the 24-man, that's still a good amount of people to where it feels like you're having a party. I raid, or at least I raid these days, because to me it feels like a giant party. Woo! Get out the glow sticks. To me, raiding has become a social event. The same with grouping. It's just a big group. So when you get the amount of people, like say the 72-man from EverQuest, there is more people there than you can logically socialize with. And you start getting these pockets of people chatting, which isn't a bad thing, but it's just like a big party at somebody's house. You know, you get these small isolated pockets of people who are just socializing amongst themselves, and no one really makes new friends. When the 24-man is big enough to where you can add strangers, but it's not so many people that you might feel a little intimidated to go and just start a conversation with somebody that you might not necessarily know.
Yeah.
While I'm usually very quick to condemn World of Warcraft, I think that's something they absolutely got right doing the 10 and 25 mans raids. I think they did that right, and I'm happy that Pantheon could quite possibly become something similar to that, as long as the core of the rating does not become like WoW.
Yeah. So let's go and add some additional aspects of raiding mechanics to the raid sizes as well, because I want to quickly go and jump over to bringing raiding onto a larger scale, opening it up to the general public, to the smaller guilds that might not have that manpower to go at raiding 4 or 5 times a week, or have the time or the lust to even do that. Let's be honest, we're all older now. We have jobs, we have families, we have a life outside of gaming, believe it or not, and responsibilities in society as well that have to be addressed day in, day out, so that we can carry on doing what we want to do in our private time. With the AI, or the approach to the AI, and especially with the dispositions and behaviours of the NPCs, I see a lot of ways for VR to utilise those mechanics into raiding, and open up raiding also to, let's just say, the beginners, people that aren't in that elitist status, if you want to call it that are all about this raiding. Because having 12, 24 or 18, so X2, X3, X4 raids, and adding a smart AI and disposition and behaviour can also come into play and get those that are interested in raiding. Because let's be honest, a lot of raid forces out there, they have ridiculous requirements. You have to be on at certain times, you have to be available when they call you up, you have to have a 70% what's the word I'm looking for?
Participation?
Exactly, participation.
You have to do so many raids a week, you have to have a certain gear score or certain achievements or whatever.
And it locks a lot of people out that have joined the game anew, or who have so far stayed away from the raiding aspect, and it's really hard. They want to compete. They want to see what this raiding's all about, because it gets a hype within the community. The raiding, it's something people long for. They look at and they think, wow, these are the raiders. Raiders are talked about and perceived. We put them into this pedestal. Raiders are put into the pedestal, whether we want to or not. That's what happens. People look up to the raiders and they're like, wow, look at these guys, what they've achieved. And yes, it is something to look on and have respect for those people doing it. But it's also become really hard for newer people or smaller people to get involved. So with the dispositions and behaviours of NPCs, I can see mechanics come along where raid encounters are set up for a certain raid size, an X4 for instance, but now an X2 group come along and they take on this encounter, or try to take him on, try to challenge him. With the disposition and behaviour, adding that to the AI mechanic of that encounter would offer ways to spread out the approach to that encounter. You would broaden the perspective of it. You could have an X2, an X3, an X4 raid go at this. You could add mechanics into the system where if you're more than X4, there's backup so that you don't exploit the system. Or
what's X2, X3, X4? What's that mean?
That's terminology, basically. That's my EverQuest 2 terminology. For X2 is basically group times 2, group times 3, group times 4 for the raid sizes.
Basically a way to scale.
Ah, okay.
Or so, difficulty rating, if you will.
Having these dispositions behaviors, you could add different approaches to the raid encounter, so where you still have it competitive for, you know, the competitive raid forces out there. So you have the X4 approach to it. He has certain dispositions, behavioural patterns. Now, if you tag an X2 raid, so basically you hit the encounter, you engage it, you can add smart AI to it that basically registers that there's an X2 now approaching this encounter. He's going to behave differently. You could add a different reward system to that as well to still keep it competitive, but open it up to people that generally don't want to go for it. What would you think about systems like that, where you broaden the perspective of raiding and bring raiding into an area where a lot of people can enjoy it and, you know, get their first blood gush on raiding, and because that's a good way to keep it competitive still. Obviously, it would
now,
also go on.
Are you saying that smaller raids are really more for the newer people, and not so much for like your veterans or anything like that, or is that what you're?
Nah, basically, you have a lot of guilds or a lot of smaller raid forces that don't have the manpower to go at a full X4 raid, you know, a 4-group raid. They want to compete on raiding, but they can't do it. You know, so people form alliances, this, that, and the other. They form, you know, separate groups that they get together, and most of these always fall apart. Like pickup raiding, for instance, and it doesn't always come together. And a lot of raids fall apart in the night. You know, they get together, but they don't have the manpower to go at it. So everybody's annoyed. Everybody goes off and does something else.
It becomes a bad experience all around.
It becomes a bad experience all around. So what I'm suggesting is you can have these raid encounters that are generally for a 4-man group, have behavioural patterns behind them depending on the raid size that go and approach this encounter. It doesn't necessarily have to be for each raid encounter that they have. They can still have static 4-man group raids, but they can also have encounters in the world that balance. You know, they balance themselves depending on what raid size is approaching this encounter. They behave accordingly, and they reward accordingly.
Do you think there's a case to be made to have raids of both types, where it's consistent all the time, or persistent, versus, you know, the behaviors, which would my hands are going too far, but
absolutely,
you know, to bring some dynamism into it.
Dynamic.
Hey,
no, there's absolutely a space for both, because, like I said earlier, it's all about the learning curve, which turns a lot of raiding subcultures into a group of elitists. I will address one thing, though, that, like I said in chat, there's Trixden did mention that a lot of guilds these days do have like normal raid days, and they do have training days, which is to their credit, because back in my day, they didn't do that, you know, and that just shows how the community's grown up over the years. That a lot of the older gamers understand that it's nice to have someone to help give you an intro into this kind of thing, because it is an entirely different world as to what you do solo or in a small group. So it does depend on the guild, very much so. But there is also a lot of cases where it's a casual guild. It's just someone and a bunch of his real life friends got together, and there might be 10 people, and maybe they can all game together, maybe they can't. So that's where the problem comes in, of trying to get accessible rates for smaller groups. But with that said, when you have a gentler learning curve, at least at the beginning, it really does make the raiding scene much more accessible because you're slowly teaching people what's happening, what's going on, what to expect. Show them how they can kind of think about these encounters in a different way. With the static versus a dynamic boss, static is a great way to learn because nothing really changes. You know, at 70% he's going to do this, at 40% he's always going to do this. So it would help, say, someone who's new to the MMO genre understand the mentality behind a raider.
Yeah.
But when you get into the dynamic stuff, me as a longtime raider, it gives me shivers of joy because that means I've got to think on my feet. Me and my raid have to really kind of be close knit and know what we're going to do because, like as an example, tanks. I got to know that my complementary tank or tanks, I know that they're the first priority for them is going to be to grab this because we all have an understanding, or at least an unspoken understanding. This guy is going to be tanking this for whatever reason. So automatically I know as the off tank, my job is to pick up and add. So while I can strap on DPS, I should keep a lookout for things that are happening. And doing that doing the dynamic, you always have that every time because maybe he's going to do something similar. Maybe you're going to get a curveball. You never go in going, oh, this is what's going to happen. Okay, time it at 35 seconds. I hit number 4, and he's at 25% in 3, 2, 1. Hit this. You know, when you're an experienced raider, that gets boring. And you can almost just blindfolded do some of these events.
And doing dynamic stuff also adds to that competitiveness, to that challenge as well.
Yeah.
Because I mean, yes, obviously after going at an encounter for 4 weeks, 5 weeks on end, day in, day out, you want to reach that point where you understand the encounter, you've got it down, you've got your raid going, you've got your raid doing it. But it would be a refreshment to have the dispositions and behaviours where he might have a set of static changes on him. So depending on what kind of behaviour pattern he's in, his disposition is going to be completely different. So we have to first figure out, right, he's got this behavioural pattern, he's going to do this next. He's got that behavioural pattern, that's going to happen. So it would add to that challenge, and it would also add to, like Lex said, that gushy feeling of going at this raid encounter, or even in dungeons as well. This applies not just to the raiding, but to dungeons as well. Having named encounters have these kind of behavioural patterns as well. But you go into that raid without knowing what the hell's going to hit you. So you might have like 5, 6 different behavioural patterns where the dispositions are all different, and you've got to learn all of those. That adds to that challenge, that competitiveness as well, and it also is a larger time sink, because that's another major factor as well when it comes to raiding. In most games, raiding's the end game content. You know, it's the do it all, be it all. That's the end game. And a lot of these bigger, larger raid forces that 24/7 raiding around the clock, they have that down pretty fast. You know, they'll go at it a month or 2 months or whatever. That content's dead. It's just basically just been released, but for them, they've gone and conquered it all. They're now pushing for more and more, and they need updates, they need new raid zones, they need new this. That's where your twinking starts coming about. They start upping their twinks and everything, and then basically you've got an overflux of gear flying about.
Eventually your primary raiders get bored and check out other games, and that usually means that maybe a small percentage come back. So yeah, I mean, it would certainly help to keep things interesting, because you could technically have an easy time 1 week on a certain boss, and then the next week it could be like, oh god, what happened? It's like a gate opened up in the back because he called for help, and like 40 little things came out and just swamped us, and we weren't prepared.
That's the thing too. If your raids are dynamic in how they react, what they do, blah blah blah, that might slow down how quickly people burn through the content. You know, it gives the devs a little bit of a break.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because when you think about it being dynamic, the game is technically generating new or slightly different content every time you kind of spin it up. Whereas if you okay, for those of you who have played WoW, you go into next Rammus, I can't remember the first guy's name, but the safety dance. It was great fun the first 4 or 5 times, but after that, it was just like, oh my god, I can't believe we have to fight this again. You know, with a dynamic rating system, you potentially might not get stuck in that kind of slump, or it'll at least push that slump further away. Because to be honest, I mean, I do love raiding, I do love beating the big baddies, but when I beat something 8 or 9 times, and you know there are very scripted events or a static event, I get very bored to the point where I actually will take gear off to make it more difficult so that I can keep my interest. You know, and it's like kind of like taking one shoe off and then running a race across a gravel field and just to see if you can win with only one shoe on, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, go and look at the other dynamic of this as well, like opening it up to, you know, smaller groups, smaller raid forces as well, and, you know, using the smart AI to open up different loot tables, for instance. There's another possibility that they could do. You know, you might have a lesser chance to get a certain piece of gear from that encounter if you only go at it with a 2-man group. So instead of having a 3% chance when you go at it with a 4-man group raid, you've now got a 0.7% chance that he might drop that specific piece of gear. So there's definitely ways to go at it, and
right.
You know, keep the challenge there for those that, you know, do want to focus on the raiding aspect of the game.
Right. To bring up loot real quick, I mean, from a developer perspective, it could seem like a daunting task to do something where, oh, depending on how many people, depends on what loot. It's like, well, no, because just because you're trying it with more people, making the event more difficult, doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't have access to the lower tier gear. What it should do is broaden the amount of gear and potentially provide more gear because there's more people, where most people are not used to like the usual raid thing where it's like, oh, he drops 4 pieces of gear and there's 50 people here kind of thing. You know, it's like that does slow down your raid force a little bit, but it also creates a little bit of very minute instances of animosity between raiders. Because we've all been there, so-and-so comes for the first time, and they beat you by like 2 points on the roll, and you've been there every time for the last 2 months, right? All of a sudden it's like, I could throttle him. But say you do the 2-group raid. Maybe it drops 2 pieces of gear. And maybe it's from lower down in the list. Well, now you've got 3 groups. So maybe that bumps it up to a tier, unlocking another loot table that combines with it. And maybe now he drops 3 pieces of gear, just as a very simple example. Yeah. So you could potentially take that to as many people as many groups as you want without a limit. You know, because it's as long as you scale correctly, obviously, you could potentially make it worth it, make every potential raid target worth it, even if you are the top guild.
And there's so many variations you can go with this. You know, having like 2 pieces of top gear for a 2-group raid that could drop out of a possibility of, you know, a 4-group raid, and then you add like, you know, let's say you got like 16 different items in there altogether total that could be dropped, and then you break down the percentages on that. You know, the chance and appeal for somebody that, you know, has never really raided before or hasn't got the time to be raiding 4 or 5 times a week, or, you know, can't reach that time schedule all the time, and this, that, and the other, and has to basically miss out on all this good stuff, goes at it with a 2-group raid, and he's going to go at it again and again because, you know, he feels the reward. He feels that, you know, he's got the chance to get this piece of gear that he's looking for, and they'll go at it again. And when they get it, you know, they're so overjoyed. They're going to be so happy that they've got this, even if it takes them maybe 15 times longer than it would as if they go at it as in the challenge, you know, the hard mode. Let's say, just call it the hard mode. They go at it in the, you know, the full X4 raid. But again, having stuff like this happen as well with the dispositions and behaviours is also a cool thing to look at. You know, like, we don't know how they're going to handle, because raiding is going to be open world. It's going to be open, you know, it's open contested content. What happens if you have, like, for instance, 2 raid forces in there, and they both run at this encounter, and they both hit it at the same time? How are the mechanics going to work there? And that's where dispositions and behaviours come into play, for instance. A safeguard for the developers that they can put into play. It's now been hit by 2 raids. It's now technically an X8 raid going at an X4 encounter. There's a lot of options they can do here now. They could
you imagine the raid mob just kind of peacing out, like, I'm out.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly. Out. Basically, he tucks his tail and he legs it.
I can just imagine now you get a frost giant who's just like, peace out.
Yeah.
Walks away.
But, you know, just think of the possibilities there as well from a fun perspective. You know, like you guys said, this guy, peace out, I'm out of here. Or, you know, he turns to stone, for instance. He's now stone. Right. He's now locked for whatever.
Maybe an additional boss spawns.
Maybe an additional boss spawns, exactly. Or maybe you got an instant wipe. You know, add that fun to it, that risk, because that's what it all comes down to. Raiding, risk versus reward.
Since you brought up that scenario, the hardest part about dealing with that situation is what do you do with loot? Because you get 2 raid forces. We'll just assume that, you know, the difficulty gets ramped up, but you're still, both raid forces are fighting. Eventually, one's going to contribute more than the other, which would, depending on how they want to handle the rights to the mob, you know, first hit or who contributed the most. One raid, either way, is basically left holding the bag going, well, that was a whole lot of fun for nothing. But if you could do instance looting specifically for a raid, and only a raid, you wouldn't have to worry about dropping a second boss down. Although that would be fun too, don't get me wrong. Because that way, like, say it's a frost giant, 2 raid forces come in, there's really technically no reason for you not to join forces and fight without having to go through this gigantic merge process of who's in charge, who does this. You know, it's a mess. If anyone's ever merged 2 raids together, it's a mess. It takes forever. But this way, organized group A, organized group B can go together on their own, technically as their separate force, but together in their efforts. And if you could instance the loot to the boss, when it dies, whoever's doing loot for group A deals with theirs, whoever has for group B deals with theirs.
Well, it's
not a bad idea.
Well, it's no different to when you do, like, you know, when you do your quests. And there's a quest item on the encounter. That's how you would handle that kind of situation. Everybody, you know, gets a piece, or, you know, there's loot for everybody. So you've got, like, loot for Raid Force A, loot for Raid Force B.
Right.
You know, so
it would have to be balanced in terms of certain shortcomings to a system like that. Like, you would have to ensure that each raid, basically, if there's 2 raids, then, you know, they would have to have participated to a certain percentage of whatever. You know.
Yeah. You can't just have, like, somebody just milking the efforts.
Someone in my raid shoot an arrow so we get loot. You know, that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
Although theoretically, if the scaling of a boss was very dynamic, meaning a second raid force can walk in and then something happens to make it more difficult, that person shooting that arrow to get the loot, this other raid force would be forced to participate, or the first one is likely to wipe.
I just had something. I got an idea. We talked about this with the you know, on specifically to PvP arena, having a PvP arena on a PvE server where basically the participants could basically decide the outcome of, you know, who fights with what and this, that, and the other. What about doing something like this as well for raiding, for instance, where maybe the cities have arenas and they have big bad monsters in there that you could basically go to and kind of get your first glance.
Like raids on demand, right?
Yeah, like raids on demand, where basically it's like training wheels, where you have
for intro level only.
Yeah,
I would be all for that, because if it was something where maybe
like a tutorial.
Yeah, or maybe, you know, the loot is very, very toned down, because you're meant to be able to defeat it with just, you know, the stuff you find in the world, you know, without raiding.
There doesn't necessarily have to even be loot. You know, there could be...
No, there doesn't necessarily have to be, but it is nice to get something in return for it. But like, say you have to talk to someone, he's like, okay, here's what you do, here's what happens. It doesn't technically cost you anything, and you could constantly respawn him, and maybe you get a couple coins. It's just whatever. Just
what about having like, you know, like levels, for instance, where you start off, you know, you've never raided before, so you're basically a novice.
A raid experience bar.
A raid experience bar, basically, that basically would tell you at a certain point you are now ready to go out into the big bad world. Join a raid force, create a raid force, and, you know, have at it. Take on the challenges of Terminus, kind of thing. Just for fun in games, like, you know, this is just something to reward the people, like make them feel good. Hey, you know, I've.
The only problem I could see with something like that is that would, like, how, first off, what are your metrics for evaluating what experience means, right, for a raid XP bar? And two, is it something that's like public knowledge? Because then you get people like, oh, you're raid level 1, you can't beat us.
Right, you know, like you run into that gear score problem. Yeah. Also, if you were to even just do an achievement, then you would end up getting messages like, you know, you can't do this raid unless you link me this achievement, which in WoW was the straw that broke the camel's back for me.
People actually did that?
Yeah, it's like you have to have beaten Nax Ramus on whatever, like 10-man, in order to do the 25-man. It's like, at that time, it's like my guild was at the Lich King, and I'm just like, I'm here to help you people. This is ridiculous. I'm out.
I mean, the things I would see happening in a arena like this is, you might learn about the different dispositions and behaviours. You might learn about, you know, you could even have specific goals that you have to achieve in the raid. Like, for instance, the enchanter has to mez at a certain point. You know, you have to do the off-tanking.
Trixton got it. Perfect. So Trixton just said, you know, maybe there's no loot, and there's like a mentoring currency. So like if you go with them to help them through this, you actually get like a mentoring experience.
That would actually
get through mentoring.
That's a great idea.
That is, Trixton. Thank you so much.
That's a brilliant idea, because that brings in, you know, the raid forces. They can actually contribute to bringing in new people. It brings people together. So a brilliant way of socializing. So you could have like people that offer their themselves to, hey, you want to raid? You want to have a look and see what's going on? You know, you could even have maybe people that are tagged like that. You know, raid mentor, for instance.
See, I really like that idea, to the point where I'm jealous that I didn't think of it, because
that's only what we do.
Because I'm at the point in my MMO career that I do get a certain amount of satisfaction out of training new tanks. You know, people who've never tanked before but are interested in doing it. And I can definitely see myself trying to do that at least once a week. Even if I can't raid because of like schedule conflicts or life or whatever, I could still probably do that, because I wouldn't expect a type of tutorial raid like the arena system you're describing to really be like a 4-hour event. It's just, you get together, you go in, you tell him, start it on up. Gate opens, he walks out. All right, let's do this. We died. Okay, we spawn back. No res, sickness, nothing. It just does it for us. We go back in. We got it this time. Thanks for all the help. No problem, guys. I'm out.
Do you think that would cause some trivialization of your dispositions and behaviors. Like people want to like chain learn what the mobs can have as a array.
Well,
I think a situation like that you'd want to stay more static, because then there's less guesswork. Whereas the higher tier, or I don't want to say elitist because I really don't want to use that word with raiding anymore. But I'll just say the more experienced raiders, the dynamic is really for them to keep them on their toes, so that nothing is ever always a carbon copy.
You could basically go in and maybe you show off 2 different dispositions. Maybe you show 1 or 2 different behavioral patterns to introduce them into.
So you could have two or three different training mobs. The first 2 are static. Maybe one's just a simple tank and spank. The next one is you have to watch for something, and then the third one is a slightly dynamic one to where maybe not as intense as it would be in the real world, but it would give them an idea of going, oh, okay, I should really pay attention to what's going on here rather than just watching my numbers pop up.
So I want to quickly address, before I move into the next idea I had, with the dispositions and behaviors and the smart AI, another system that I think would refresh the raiding aspect, and is, you obviously have static encounters, and with the dynamic system that we're looking at, would you in most MMOs nowadays, it's a matter of DPS.
It's usually a DPS race.
It's usually a DPS race at the end of the day, and I'm fed up with it, to be honest with you. I'm fed up with, we don't have enough DPS, we can't, finish this encounter. Surely there must be ways to add in different strategies, different approaches that one can take if they do not meet the requirement to just go at it with a DPS meter. To reach a certain DPS level. Would you like to see some kind of dynamic mechanics like that, where you could have, you've got your dispositions and behaviours, that's one challenge to the whole system that you got to learn, and now you got to think of, hey, because we can't do it with DPS, and what normally happens there, you got the raid leaders, you got people fighting each other and shouting at each other during the raid, oh, you messed it up again, blah blah blah. People start fighting. It's a constant PITA.
Well, here's a scenario. Maybe there's a raid encounter where say you're in a cave, right? And there's these pillars all around the cave, and the mob can destroy these pillars. But maybe you have crafters on hand, and they have to rebuild the pillars at certain stages to keep the roof from falling down. While people are still battling off this mob.
Yeah.
We've said multiple times, especially with grouping, where we would love Pantheon to be a game where it's more about, you should cover your basics, obviously. It's like, the rogue isn't going to be the main tank when stuff's hitting so hard, a warrior has a hard time. But you should be able to go with unconventional setups. You should be able to take a second tank with you, or a second healer,
or have somebody else tank it instead of the general warrior.
Right, you should be able to get by.
Because that adds.
It does. It is more inclusive, and I know that's a loaded word these days. But when I say inclusive in terms of Pantheon, I'm talking like, if Vaad wants to play a tank and I want to play a tank, we can still be in the same group and not have to worry about stepping on each other's toes. Yeah, we don't kill stuff as fast, but the extra survivability should somehow, or at least give us a way that we can use that to our benefit. And I feel that should happen with raids as well. Cover your basics. After that, do whatever you really want to do and make it work.
And it's another time sink as well for the developers. Because you have so many possibilities of approaching the challenges that are put in front of you. You've got the dispositions and behaviours, you've got the smart AI, you've got the group mock-up that you can basically design how you basically would, obviously there has to be a certain structure in there. You can't have 6 tanks in a group and off you go. It's not going to work.
Right.
But
no,
you could, technically you don't have the warrior with you today. Now, we normally know that there's some certain abilities on this encounter where a warrior would be beneficial. But hey, if we have somebody that can stun that encounter, or, you know, undermine that special ability when he does it or whatever, we might have a chance with a Dire Lord or with a Paladin.
Right.
You know, so adding that all in is a major time sink for raiding, and it gives the developers more free time to concentrate on bringing in new raid ideas, new content. Maybe maybe some more dispositions and behaviours later on down the road.
Right.
So, go ahead, Lex.
I was going to say, it's very rare that I say this, but there's a few things that early WoW got absolutely right. And
that's actually twice today.
I know. And tanking in terms of like some of the group instances they got right, because some of them worked better for a warrior who could take the really heavy hits. Some of them worked better with a druid who had lots of hit points, but also had lots of evasion compared to the others. So if it hit really, really fast, but for light damage, the warrior could still do it, but it would have an easier time with the druid. And then, you know, with the paladin, if there was something that would lower healing, the paladin could help and heal himself through it, thereby making up for that shortcoming. I really, really, with every fiber of my being, want to see that in Pantheon, to where, yes, a Dire Lord does work against casters. We all know that. We've seen it in the streams that they're designed to be really good against casters. But that doesn't mean they're only good against casters. And the same with paladins or warriors. They should be aimed at a specific one, but they should still be able to do a respectable job on everything else.
I've got to ask, right, the other side of this, because this is something that the EQ community and the developers missed completely. The original concept of raiding an EverQuest 2 was designed that you would go into a raid zone, and there was usually 4 or 5 raid encounters in there that were actually positioned for the different tanks. But people either ignored it or they missed the concept behind it. You had a raid encounter that was arcane bound. You had raid encounter that was poison bound. You had a raid encounter in that with physical damage. How would you go about battling something like that happening in Pantheon, where people ignore the systems?
Climates. With EverQuest 2, the problem there was that none of their classes were really done very well. That was for multiple reasons, not just due to incompetence, although there was quite a bit of that. And without having your classes fully fleshed out and properly developed, you can't add situations to where they should shine. There's just... Because
no, but what I'm asking
they have no definition, so they can't shine anywhere.
Yeah, but what I'm asking,
you have the foundation to work off of.
You know, how would you combat something like that happening in a game like Pantheon? You know,
to me, or at least from my perspective, it's all about the class. You need to spend the time on that class. You need to look at it, get it the way you want it, then look at it again, then hand it to somebody else and have them look at it from a different perspective. With a lot of these MMOs, you know, it'll be one person or maybe 2 people design a class, and even with us, when you work together enough, you tend to see the same way about something. I mean, Yarn, you and I, we very rarely disagree on anything because we've been working together for 3 long years.
Come March.
Right, come March.
Hey, knock on wood.
Yeah. And, you know, that's where the problems start. Yeah. You need to have someone else. I absolutely adore the Dire Lord, but I try other classes. Because I notice things about other classes more than the Dire Lord, because you get so focused on what you enjoy with it.
I just want to quickly stress here as well, though, this is by no means us saying that everything has to be like what we discussed today. There should be static encounters, there should be DPS only encounters, there should be encounters where only a Dire Lord or only the warrior can take it on. But, you know, have something out there where it's mixed up, where the possibilities are, or let's say, let me backtrack with only the warrior and only the Dire Lord and only the paladin should take it on, where it's actually the optimal approach to that, but you can do it with a Dire Lord or Paladin and whatnot. We're not saying that, you know,
it's made easier being done the way you have determined that it should be done.
We're all for
not easy per se, just it's
statistically it skews things in your favor a little more.
Yeah.
And it adds a major time sink as well for the development team to work on future content without having to, because having all these different kinds of systems in there is going to be a hell of a challenge for any raid force to master all.
Right, that would force any raiding guilds to be very well-rounded. And that's not a bad thing. It would force them to make sure that, you know, I'll use the raiding guild that I was in EverQuest. You had first position backups, second position backups, you know, and you always took your A team. Unless someone didn't make it, then you would go to their first tier backup, and if they didn't show up, the second tier backup, you know, and I'm not saying that that's the way guilds should be run, but for us, where we were very competitive, it worked for us because we always had technically 2 or 3 raid forces waiting in the wind to go. You know, and the only way we managed to pull that off is that when the A team set off onto whatever adventure they were going on, the B or the C teams went off on their own raids. But it's that well-rounded bit that really sticks to me, because especially, I don't know how it is in WoW anymore, but when I left, it was you have your main tank. You shower him with gear, or her. You have your primary healer or healers, and you shower them with gear. And then the DPS are kind of left in the wind, and they're randomly rotated.
See, that's tough, though, because, when your tank is always your first line of defense, so... Yeah, you're going to want to gear them up.
Yeah,
it makes it easier, you know.
It is, but the thing is that when you don't do the well-rounded approach, you always seem to have the one, and I've seen this happen multiple times, it just destroys guilds, where you have your primary tank. You shower him with gear nonstop, and then he gets to the point where he or she, sorry, I use he as an all-inclusive term, they feel like they've outgrown the guild because no one's keeping up with them, even though they fail to realize that they're the tip of the pyramid on the loot raid. And then they leave, and then your raid power goes from here to here.
What about adding a complete different looting structure to raiding? So instead of, having the chance to get this piece of gear, you might, similar to what they've done in multiple games, but obviously I would do this slightly differently. I wouldn't have like 20,000 different currencies, but you could have like a specific raiding currency that everybody would get in a raid.
Almost like an in-game DKP-ish.
Something like that, where they could go to a NPC vendor and purchase...
That sounds an awful lot like the token systems, which I despise.
Yeah, but obviously with the tokens, you had like 20,000 different types, and you would get a pattern, this, that, and the other.
Right.
Because
maybe it's definitely give your guild leader, like being part of a guild, you can have a merchant that's NPC per se, that the guild leader or officers can set like a DKB value to it, and you can kind of go to it and buy something from it, like a vending machine. Obviously, you would have to get it first, like it had to be dropped.
Right. It's so basically, if I'm understanding right, basically like the raid leader would set the value.
You could say something like that, basically.
I like the way it's going. I don't think it would work, because then you run the risk of people saying, "Oh, how much is this? 999999999," and it's an easy thing to kill, right? When it comes down to currencies, you really got to kind of leave stuff out of players' hands as much as possible, because there's somebody that will abuse it every time.
I got one for you. How about having a system in play, going back to smart AI, where maybe you don't just reward 1 or 2 people, but you reward the class specifics in the raid. So you have the mages, you have the tanks, you have the healers, and you have the melees. So maybe 4 pieces of gear drop, one for each archetype of, class variation. The melees, the robe, the casters. What about something like that, where you gear out 4 people, or have 4 pieces of gear dropped out, so the healers can fight it off against each other. The tanks can fight it off against each other.
It's like it's controlling the drops on the supply side, which could theoretically work. Grizzly came up with an interesting idea of how certain gear is guild owned, and when the raid's over, it goes back to the guild vault. I'm not going to approach this by saying that there may not even be a good solution for this, because I think in the end it comes down to us, how we handle our business. If we want to shower specific people, certain pillars of our raid force, and get them really strong, we gotta pray to God that they don't leave.
Another idea. You ready for it? Take away raiding gear completely, right? And only have like runes or stats that drop from the raid encounters, and put crafters in the forefront. Raiding gear is crafted, period. And you have these runes that you can put onto it. Throw it at the player base. Have crafters be in that.
I like that because I'm a very unconventional player. I look at cookie cutters and I cringe. So when I'm doing a spec or I'm gearing my character, I go with what I believe to be correct, not what is the current fad. So your system leads me to feel like I can craft my armor the way I want it to be. Me and Vaad could be wearing the same adamantium breastplate, but mine could be it could have a high dex, it could have high AC, high avoidance, where his could have tons and tons of hit points and tons of resist. It's technically the same gear, but it's tuned to how we want it to be. And I like that, especially when you're involving the crafters.
I like an idea that crafters can augment a gear per se, but I'm not buying. I'm not biting into that system. I think that goes too much towards like your Diablo-esque looting system, where it's more just RNG.
Right. I think theoretically it could work, but instead of saying runes, maybe it could just be additional pieces that are like runes. If you name them differently, sometimes you get a different feel from them, like saying the liner of your breastplate, or you could get obviously a gem, or you could get a rune, or maybe if it's silk you get some kind of embroidery for it. But my fear is if everything is crafted from the crafters, yes, you're going to have the vast majority of them are going to be very nice because you're gilded. They're going to be like, yes, we have all the parts to make this. It's for DPS. It's a wonderful dagger. So let's see who we can get it for. There are going to be people who do that, but there's also going to be people who take it for their own benefit, where not to say they're going to use the item, but they're going to take the materials, they're going to craft the item, and they're basically going to put it up to the highest bidder. Guild or not.
Well, yeah, that can happen.
Which
that is.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that type of player ends up hurting guilds more than helping.
Well, that comes down to the community acknowledging people like that and putting them on the spot. Basically, right. That comes down to us, letting people know that that's a bad person. He's an utter and total douchebag. He'll take your stuff and he'll tell you he's going to do something. That comes down to us. There's always risks to everything. Doesn't matter how you go about it.
That's not a bad thing.
This also adds again another time sink to the whole raiding aspect, because before you've even gotten all your raid gear for every single person in your raid, it's going to be months passing by, because the crafters will have to learn the different crafting recipes, and you need to gather all the materials for because that also adds another time sink in there as well, because you might still require normal resources as well that are needed to forge the gear together for you.
Right. I mean, one of the biggest excitements for Pantheon for me, from any front, grouping, soloing, raiding, is how crafters are going to play a role in the world. I do want them to have a very, very much increased presence within Pantheon. I don't necessarily think it would be good to go from a genre where crafters have played almost no viable role at all to they're the only role that really matters. I think there needs to be a medium.
If say really good dropped gear is not so common, and it's not you upgrade every level or every time you zone or something like that, then at least for your I would say early levels, crafters really would play a part in patching the holes for the gear you did not get.
Yeah.
And then if you get into the later with like sort of a system like you're saying, where crafters can create gear with some adjustments, some alterations, that could help play too. Think of Amber Fate too, where they have that forge that's like halfway up to the zone.
Yep.
So that brings crafters out of the town,
out of the workshop,
in the world. Yeah, exactly.
Out of their comfy zone.
Right. And I mean, they had mentioned that maybe that forge is going to be used for crafters.
Yeah. Which
is very exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, even coming from me, who's primarily a group dungeon runner / raider. I think there still does need to be some dropped items, because there are certain iconic items that need to drop and need to not be so moddable.
What about the raid gear the raid encounters are wearing?
That's another thing. That's like a whole other level, to where if he's carrying a sword, he should drop a sword.
Because they said basically what you see on the encounters is stuff that's going to drop, basically. So you could have maybe that piece, that armor set that raid encounter's got on is the ultimate reward for the raid. For the tank, for instance. Or, maybe that encounter has, spawns ads as well, and they are robe wearers. There's a chance that the robe set drops, for instance. And those are the ultimate rewards that you can get out of the raid, because doing it with the crafters and everything, and the way we've been describing this, adds a money sink, a time sink, and a min-maxing as well. Because if you go and take the augment or whatever and put it, or the stats onto your piece of armor, you're going to try and min-max, try and figure out what's going to work best for you going into this encounter each time. So you might change out the gear again. Might have the crafter take down this piece, add this to it, and see. And that's a major time sink, a major money sink, and it just basically leaves room for the developers to not worry about, hey, are we producing content fast enough? Are we doing, adding in content frequently enough to keep everybody opposed and happy and engaged with the game?
Right.
So I know Brad had said that they want to make it so that there are iconic items, like so that person's wearing Robo the Oracle, that person's wearing a shiny metallic, or that guy has a yak, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So there's definitely an opportunity for both worlds to exist there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. As one thing, as an aside here, but kind of similar, is there's nothing more annoying than like you were to fight an orc that has a sword. You kill him and there's no sword, right? It's like, it doesn't make sense. And I've always justified that in my mind by saying, oh, well, it just broke. I sliced through it and embedded my sword in his face. But, why not add broken items that would represent items that could have dropped?
Yeah.
Oh, crap. They can maybe be repaired into like some mundane version of it.
Yeah,
that's a fantastic idea.
You could even add like it
could be the base item to crafting.
And it could also
could be used for experimenting.
You could add it to perception as well, though.
Item.
You could use it as perception as well. That item drops, and all of a sudden you get a perception, and it tells you maybe about this sword in its originality still exists somewhere on this world. And now you've got a whole new goal. You want to go out and try and find this freaking sword.
But you could salvage those items too.
Yeah. So there's plenty of possibilities to go with that.
Just because it doesn't drop this item that is technically usable doesn't mean it shouldn't drop an item.
Yeah.
Because that item can open up, even though it's technically broken junk, there's a lot you can do with it.
Well, you know, it's...
Are you listening here?
It's junk for us, or it's junk for the one person, but it might not be for the other. You know? But one thing I quickly want to...
Like maybe broken breastplate drops. Maybe a crafter goes and he disassembles and he learns something new.
You could also have, like, you know, you mentioned Amber Fate with the fire pit down there where you can craft and everything. Maybe an item drops in Amber Fate, and there's another raid zone, raid dungeon somewhere in the world, where that item might be able to be forged into the real item itself, not necessarily in Amber Fate. You think it, you know, oh, I've got this broken down,
God, I'm gonna explode
melted breastplate. You think it's a bunch of rubbish.
Think of this. Okay, you go. We'll say you're in Amber Fate. You pick up a broken item. We'll just say it's a broken set of boots. You leave it in your inventory. You're walking away. You walk through a climate or an environmental obstacle.
Starts glowing.
That's fire-based, and then you get a perception hit telling you that it's reacting to that element. And then you go, wait a minute.
Where do I need to go?
Maybe I should take it to that forge because it's fire.
Yep.
But and then you take it there, and it's like you don't have the skills to really do anything to it. You're just like...
Well, maybe you could...
All of a sudden, it's like, oh my god, what? It's like a small little quest you just unlocked.
Yes, you know, or you could add even other classes into this system.
Yeah.
You know, having multi-classing
Yeah.
perception, basically, where
think about it, you get another perception about where it's glowing and it's vibrating and it feels, you get a holy sense of awe. You give it to a cleric or a paladin and they have it in their inventory or on their cursor and they cast a healing spell on themselves. It just changed.
That's cool.
Yep.
Cool.
So one thing I also want to bring up,
I would lose my mind.
That would be an awesome system to add in as well. But one thing I also want to bring up is something that Reza mentioned that sparked this idea. Let me try and see if I can find it now. Where the hell is it? Anyway, with lower level raiding, he's talking about lower level raiding. Right? We know raiding's going to be a companion. You know, it's going to start in its early levels and carry on with you. Why does it necessarily have to be like that? Why not add the smart AI to this as well? Where, depending on what level you are, the raid encounter scales to that level.
That's not a bad idea, because we'll say, for instance, you go to Amber Fate. We'll just say, out of the blue, it's level 40. Okay, the mobs in there are level 40. Well, if you get enough level 20 people, you should still technically be able to kill them. It's not going to be easy, but you could technically do it. And then you make it to the raid boss, who, the way it generally works is if it's a level 40 zone, maybe the trash in there is all level 40 or designed for a group of level 40s, but then the boss is designed for like 3 or 4 groups of level whatever. If you can get a full raid of level 20s to take on these level 40s and somehow they manage to make it to the boss, why not reward them with a chance? But you have to do like an average level of everybody involved, because if you get a level 50 in with the level 20s, he could technically be soloing it. But when you get to the boss, the average level is still going to be fairly high, and that 50 is probably not going to do a whole lot of good by himself.
Well, you could add in a system where you have like a min-max, a majority system, basically. The majority of people in that group are level 20. Now you've got you've got 2 level 50s in there. Boom, they are automatically scaled down, so that they can't have an impact on the outcome. But what I'm looking at is even the open world with raiding as well, because we do know that they want to kind of keep the old zones, the low-level zones, the mid-level zones, the high-level. They want to mix it up. You're going to find low-level mobs in higher-level mobs, all in these newbie zones, in the mid-level zones, so that people are constantly going back and forth and engage. You got a group of 30s engaging in Avendir's Pass in there. You got a group of level 10s in Avendir's Pass engaging in content for level 10. So that's where this whole idea came in, scaling the raiding count, having a scale with the raiding counters as well. Depending on what general level you have, you can also have a go at that raiding counter.
Right. If you can make it there,
that adds challenge as well.
Why not have a go at it? Because a group of like a raid of level 10s are likely not going to do anything against level 40s.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. You do run the risk of, say, getting a raid of level 10s alongside another raid of level 50s or what have you, having them start the fight, and then all of a sudden it's easier, and then the level 50s come in and just mass whack it in one go and just insta-kill it.
Yeah.
You do run that risk, but if they can work a system to where casting a spell or knowing what has it targeted, so the raid boss behind the scenes knows what has been, who has it targeted, there is potentially a way that you could prevent that going. If it's all about using the resources available to the script or the code controlling that boss. If he's fighting a raid and the average level of that raid is level 10, he gets scaled down. If all of a sudden there's 3 or 4 level 50s in the area and now they're targeting him, well, let's bump his level up. But again, you run the risk of getting griefed. You could see a bunch of level 10s doing it, have a bunch of level 50s come over and just target it, and all of a sudden now they can't kill him.
Well, that adds to the challenge though as well, the competitiveness.
Right. This is another not an easy solution.
it's not easy, especially with the approach that they are currently looking at. Who does the most damage gets the reward versus having it locked and everything. So you have to find that balance. For me, at the end of the day, the way I see it is the fairest. First come, first serve. Period. Whoever's engaged that encounter first gets to try it first. If they fail, off you go. Have a shot at it. It's the fairest.
There are different perception or different ways to look at it from each way, like contribution versus tagging. Because I've exploited both.
Well, there's definitely ways to exploit, yeah.
Right. I mean, I've had one person, have that one ranger from your raid while you're fighting the last trash mob tag the boss and have your main people go and fight the boss while the rest of the raid finishes up the trash. I've also seen raids where they are working on the trash and we just bypass and tag the boss. So it's not an all-capturing solution.
There's no way to do that, to be honest with you. You would limit the game so much if you put in all these artificial restrictions and everything. You want to just give enough of a tool set that people can kind of figure it out themselves, work through.
Well, again, a lot of these things that I have in the past exploited comes down to community. I was not a good community member, therefore I used every advantage I could.
But that's the problem that you're going to run into, though. You're going to run into that risk that people are going to get so fed up because you got douchebags coming along and exploiting or taking advantage of systems. So it is up to the developers as well to take care in this, to figure out ways to protect their community, protect their player base, because you don't want to be, going at an encounter and have somebody like Lex come along, you're taking care of the trash, he tags the named, and boom, off you go, he's got the named. Stuff like that. So the fairest system I have seen, and people might bash me for this, is what EverQuest 2 did. With the group or the raid having the option to lock the encounter. Period. If it's locked, it's locked. You have to now wait your turn. Either they succeed or they don't. Make that a viable option. It's an option. People can choose to lock the encounters, or they can choose to have them open and run the risk and run that competitiveness and see if somebody else comes along. Obviously, if you lock the encounter, you can't get any help. You're going to have to die an awful death, period.
Yeah. With raiding, especially on a competitive level, the competitors, it comes down to mutual respect.
Mm-hmm.
If you have no respect for one another, it's going to be a messy time. Trust me.
Yeah.
If you have respect for each other, even if it's just respect for the other's abilities or how far they've come, you can still have a great time, a very competitive scene, and no one has to get bitter and upset about every little thing. It's easier said than done. Trust me. I know exactly what you're all thinking. Because, yes, it is easier said than done. But I can honestly say that, for me personally, going from a hyper-competitive raiding scene to being a casual raider, and it could be that because I'm casual now, that I care less about what's dropping. I care less about being the best. I care more about going in and having a good time. To me, having a good time means good people having a challenging encounter, not sitting around bored out of my skull, and being able to come back to it.
Well, that's it. You want... I know I'm not on my camera, but...
He's a disembodied voice coming from my client.
You want to be able to still have that... You want the tactician, you want the strategy with each other. You want... I forgot my other point already. I'm sorry.
I know how you feel.
Carry on.
So, a system that I want to look at. Go on, Lex.
I was just going to say, a lot of what we're talking about today, besides obviously like, smart AI and scaling and such and making things accessible with dispositions and whatnot, when it comes to challenge and competitiveness, it's on us. It's not on VR at all. That's all completely on us and how we treat each other. Oh,
definitely. But you still got that risk of especially in the lower content levels. It all depends on what systems they're going to put in, what are they going to offer us for raiding as well. It all comes down to how that's all going to work and function. Because we do know that raiding's going to be open. There's going to be no lockouts, this, that, or the other. No. There's going to be no instancing. So that brings me up to my next point. Because there's going to be no instancing, and you might have just a raid dungeon that you go through that's open to everybody. How are you going to go about keeping it interesting for everyone to go through there? But what I'm getting at is, with instance, you have the
everybody gets a chance kind of thing.
No. With the instance, you have the what's the word I'm looking for? The consistent. You can basically log out of the dungeon and carry on where you left. Persistent. Right. Is that the word I'm looking for?
Yeah.
Persistent encounters.
It's persistent to your instance.
Exactly. What I'm getting at is, with open world, wouldn't you get fed up? You raid this dungeon, you get to the third boss, there's like 7 bosses in there. Now, and you only raid like 2-3 hours a day, or a night or whatever. And it took you 2-3 hours to get there. At some point you want to reach the final boss, but you go in there a day, a week later or whatever, or a day later and everything. You got to go through the whole system again. You got to go through the...
frustrating. I've been there.
Now, how do you combat a system like? How do you get around systems like that, where we've beat the first, we beat the second, we beat the third, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh time. Let's get to the fourth. At some point you're going to get peed off.
Yeah, I know this. They said this. I think Joppa alluded to it for regular dungeons. That they want to make like dungeons large enough, but there's pockets of safe areas along the way. So if you and your group are playing for 2 hours, just say, and you're 40% through the dungeon, going down to the bottom level, you camp out, you come back in the next day, you do another 25% or something like that.
Right.
And you just piece by piece.
Yeah, in that example, it actually worked very well because as a competing raid force, chances are the trash is going to be back. And we all know the trash is just a road bump to the boss. But do you really want to go through 3 or 4 road bumps just to get to finally get to something that you can actually benefit from?
Yeah.
There are a lot of guilds out there that won't even bother. They'll wait. They'll go and try to find something else.
Maybe they could even have like hidden passages that you could unlock.
Right.
Inside those dungeons. Like
but
we've seen
that works
it
both ways as well.
Yeah.
That could be my guild technically bypasses you, and you just started clearing the place, and now all of a sudden you guys go and you hit the 3rd boss and realize that that's where my raid came out of the secret passage.
Yeah.
And we're leapfrogging you. Not necessarily bad or good in any respect. It's just it could be disappointing from a couple of different perspectives. When it comes to the open world raiding, I went to a couple different servers throughout my EverQuest career, and I don't recall if any other servers did it, but the Brel boards, because I ended my career on Brel Cerealis, and they had a forum called the Brel boards, and they had someone that was actually an administrator or a moderator of it all, and they scheduled raids. Because it was an open world raiding situation, and people would sign them out for a week at a time. And yeah, there were people who didn't respect it, but the thing was, it was more of a self-regulating system.
So that kind of brings me into what I wanted to bring up on my final approach. Now that comes back to the socialization of things. Looking at a guild UI or a raiding UI. What about having a system where you create a raid, it's in your UI, people can join within your guild or your raid force or whatever, but you can also make this public. And this also goes out basically to everybody on the server, informing them that, hey, the VOT or whatever are doing a raid and they have open spots. You can now see who's doing a raid, going where, and people can actually join your raid from the outside.
Like a group finder, but for raids.
But for raids, yeah. But without going through the typical hassle of what a group finder normally does, messes things up. It's
here's the thing. Okay, with that system, it's great for the bonuses, being able to get the message out there and to possibly draw in more people that might not even have the ability to do it, or someone who wants to experience another section of the game. The downside is that if I were a competing guild, and I saw something like that, I would hit that the day before. Because not only am I likely to benefit, or my guild likely to benefit, I'm hindering my competition.
Well, it would be, the way I picture the system working is, it only works when active. When you're actually going at it. You can't do it a day before. You have to now physically want to go and do this raid now.
What about instead of also like server-wide, you make it like proximity of where you're at?
Yeah, something like that maybe.
You still run the risk, but
it's not broadcasting the entire server.
Right. It has been nerfed, I guess that risk has been minimized.
You can even do it, zone related.
Right.
Only within that local zone.
This is probably one of the toughest things to talk about when it comes to raiding, especially when instances are not involved. Because with instancing, it's easy. It's like, oh, everyone gets their own instance. You don't have to worry about playing nice. You don't have to play nice because there's no option but to play nice.
And let's be honest, though, with the competitive guilds or the competitive raid forces, they're going to have their members anyway. They're not going to care less. They're going to have their people. If they don't, they're not competitors.
I think a lot of my concern stems mostly because of my past, where there are some guilds out there that are highly competitive, and they take sabotaging the competition as part of it's a viable strategy to win. Not saying it's wrong, not saying it's right.
Right.
But there is a point where when one person does it, monkey see, monkey do.
It turns into a cesspool of shit.
Yeah, you run the risk of everybody doing it because they think that's just how it works.
Yeah, but that goes with everything though in MMOs.
It is.
Everything is carbon copied from some other guild, from some raid force, from some group, from some. You know, look at the
There
AA
hasn't been an
systems.
original idea in the gaming industry for about 15 years.
Everything that's been out there is either carbon copied from the game developers themselves, or within their game, the players take on a certain feature from a raiding force or a guild or a group going or look at tactics, for instance. Tactics are copied as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes the norm, so it's going to be done anyway. And the way I'm looking at this is basically, I open up my my guild UI, I inform my we plan to do a raid today. We don't have 24 people to go and do this, but we want to do it with 24 people. I can now say that, hey, we have 5 slots open. I posted, I've got 5 slots open, I'm looking for this, that, and that. I can determine either classes or level range or this or that, or say anybody can join. And all it is a way to socialise with outsiders as well. Bring them into your communities, bring them in, give them the opportunity to go, hey, I see that you guys are going to go and raid this, I'm interested. That's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the social aspect of this.
I desperately want it to work like that. I really, really do, with all my heart. You could call me a cynic. I do tend to believe in the worst of people until proven otherwise. So I do tend to see only the downside, only the negatives to a system like that. And I guess, it is another perspective.
Well, it's actually pretty good that you do. I'm always looking at the positive.
That's arguable.
I'm always looking at the positive.
The different perspectives, yeah.
Yeah, so that helps bring in the risks as well.
So one of the things, so the devs didn't. I know it's not official, but I think somebody had said that they plan on having like 3 raid encounters ready for launch or something like that. So when it comes to raids, is it more like where the dungeons, where it's about quantity to keep people from stepping over and really becoming visceral with each other?
I do believe that there needs to be a very good amount of options, because there has to be some alternative if something negative happens to your raid force, if someone snipes your content, if your content happens not to be up, or someone else is already doing it. You need to have a fallback, which comes with raid leadership, I guess, to always have a backup plan. I remember back in EverQuest where we'd actually send out our rangers and our druids a few hours before, just to make sure we know what's up and what's not.
What about having raid encounters in the world, almost like the avatars in EverQuest or EverQuest 2, that can spawn basically in any kind of dungeon? So basically, you go into a raid. You want to go and do X raid, but there's a lot going on already there. You're late to the party, so obviously you're going to have what are we going to do now? There has to, you're talking about having a lot of content out there and a lot of fillers and having big zones. But what about putting up mobs that can randomly spawn in any kind of dungeon? Even the group-centric dungeons.
I don't think it's necessarily bad. I'm just going to say that it has to be done carefully. And we got a comment from the real Bonita here that very valid point that lockouts or everything's going to be permacamped. That is a valid point, especially in the early days of any game. But take when I retired from EverQuest, which was before lockouts, before instancing, we probably had close to 100 raid bosses that could be taken, and these things had a 1-week spawn. Some had a month spawn, but I don't think there was ever a time where I ever had to cancel a raid, be it while I was in a competitive guild or while I was in a casual guild, where we said there's nothing to kill, let's just call it a night. We always had something to kill because there were so many options. It doesn't matter if you were the biggest, baddest kid in the entire game. you can only take so much so fast. And there's a point where spending energy on something that's technically not worth it is just that, not worth it.
But there's also, other majoring factors that come into play as well, though, when you're looking at open world. Times have changed. When EverQuest was played, there was only a handful of people playing games like that. Now you've got, you've got esports, you've got, World of Warcraft that had millions and millions and millions of people competing and everything. We don't know how big an impact Pantheon's going to have, how big the community, how small the community is going to be. We don't all know what's going to hit Pantheon or any other MMO that's coming. But those are majoring factors that come into play as well, especially when you want to offer people enough to do to get around, because there's nothing more that's going to be frustrating. Like you said, he's got a valid point. When something is permacamped for weeks, months on end, and you just can't get at it.
I am needed elsewhere.
Mm?
I will be back.
Okay.
If I don't make it back before the show ends, Vaad, it's been wonderful. Everyone out there that's watching, thank you for watching. Have a good weekend.
So don't send yourself off and then just stick around and then...
Just in case, yeah.
Yep. All right then. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of other majoring factors that come in that aren't just game related. The societies we live in, the access we have to games nowadays, that all comes into the whole approach on how you want to design your game, and can backfire as well if you don't have these factors accounted for or looked at, that you have them in the back of your head, that hey, this could also be a major risk factor that we're going to hit, and this is how we solve the solution, solve the problem. This is how we hit it head on. So that's another majoring factor that has to be taken into account as well.
One of the things I'm concerned with the Pantheon, because we just don't know how it's going to work this day and age, is the fact that there are no instances. Everybody's so used to getting an opportunity whenever they want for the content. Now we have to kind of play nice and figure it out, to talk amongst each other. I don't know how that's... I mean, I'm all for it, but I think it's going to be a culture shock. It's
definitely going to be a culture shock, especially for me. I've never witnessed this in EverQuest. I started with EverQuest 2. Okay. We had instant. We had later on they had the open dungeons and the open raids, but most of it was instance, and there was still a competitiveness, there as well. And in all fairness, I would like to see a balance, a mix when it comes to this kind of thing, especially with raiding and dungeons and everything. The majority of the game can be open world, but there should be some instancing, as far as my personal view is, because it's definitely something that is going to be a culture shock. It's something that could backfire. We don't know how we're going to behave, what kind of people we're going to have on our servers, how we're going to interact with each other, how the raid forces are going to get along with each other. Having that fear of perma-camping, having that fear of people being douchebags. Yeah, we've all, we've got to deal with it as it comes. But there's nothing, I never understood why people are against instancing so much. Because at the end of the day, the way I see it, if that's a raid encounter for 4 groups, and there's a 4 group of people raiding that encounter, where is that breaking the socialization? Where is that breaking apart from the core game? Because only those 4 groups can attack that encounter. If you come in now and sit there and watch, you can't engage anyway. You can only wait for your opportunity for the raid to wipe and disappear and take it on. You're not necessarily taking people out of the game with instances. You're providing a balance. You're providing a way for people not to bump heads and get into open public fights with each other. So there is some safeguarding there when it comes to that, and instancing isn't necessarily taken away from the social aspect. Because the way I see it, first come, first serve. If I engage with my group on that named encounter, that's my named encounter, period. That's how I see it. It's mutual respect. We engaged it first. We'll have a go. We don't succeed, there you go. Now's your chance. Take it on. There's 2 sides to it, basically, at the end of the day. That's how I look at it. And I just where's the fine balance? How do you balance that out? Because it is definitely a concern for a lot of people, especially people coming from Warcraft, people coming from EverQuest 2, people coming from all these games where there is instancing. There's hardly any games out there, MMOs out there, that do it in this perspective with open world. EverQuest, Pantheon, there might be one or two others out there that have it, but it's definitely going to be a culture shock for the majority of people.
But what if maybe they what are the ways to mitigate an issue with people butting heads? Well, there's enough content for people to participate in or to consume. Limits on the total population of a server, is another means. I don't know if there's any more than that, but those, I don't know, man. I'm not.
Well,
I'm not sure about the instances.
I mean, it's perfectly fine. Like I said, it comes down to how they're going to approach this, and we've thrown out ideas enough for some of these risks that come in. With the smart AI, dispositions and behaviours, having mobs bounce around and this, that, and the other, have mob scale, this, that. The competitiveness should be there, and you're right. There should be enough content out there, and to be honest, I don't see it as a majoring factor, because once these raid forces, the bigger raid forces, the more experienced raid forces have gone and done their content, they're going to move on to the next, and the next, and the next. And we've seen it in every single game. Eventually, the older zones die and everything, content's lying around, so I can see it shape itself. And instancing I would like to see in key elements of the game, majoring factors like your epic, for instance, or class specific or race specific events evolving around your character might require instancing, solo instancing, group instancing, raid instancing. So that's how I would like to see things go about that. You can have the open world for gathering your gear, this, that, and the other. But when it comes to the majoring factors that define your story, define your role within the world, that's where I can see instancing coming in to cut out of the metro of the game being open world.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Anyway, do you have anything else you want to address? Anything come to mind, or? Because I'm kind of running out of ideas here.
Yeah, no. I had a few ideas I typed up as we're talking, and we went through them too. So.
Oh, that's cool. So, Shy, is there anything from chat?
Hello.
Hello.
There is one question, and let me get to it here. And it was from Grizzly, asking about if disposition or AI will set a limit to raid size due to the complexity of the situations.
Say that again.
Will disposition or AI set a limit to raid size due to complexity of situations?
I would say yes. Like one of the examples was with there's too many people. Mob just hikes. He's out.
Yeah. So basically, having the dispositions behaviors, a smart AI in it, and having the opportunity to go out the encounter with 2 group instead of a 4-man group is going to obviously have an effect on that whole situation, because we talked about having maybe different loot tables or percentages. We had different behavioral patterns. So this time, normally you engage that encounter with a 4-man group. At 50%, he does this. He goes back to 100%, and he spawns ads. But now you're doing it with the two groups. He doesn't do that. He doesn't go up to 100%. He just spawns ad this time. So there's definitely going to be effects that limit it and have a different impact on it as well. Yeah. So there.
That was it for questions.
So Necromancer Vaquack, slaughtering the names today. At the moment, they have only mentioned the Bard being something that they are hoping that they would love to get into by launch. There's been no mention on the Necromancer, as far as I'm aware. Vaad, have you heard anything different?
No, just a lot of people hoping that they do make it in there for launch.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yep, same here.
I think we've babbled and rambled on long enough for our first show in 2019 after a long break. We thank you all for hanging out and showing your support. And next week we'll be here with Vaad and hopefully Josh to talk about crafting this time. Another idea that came from our discussion with our interview with Vaad, looking at possible trade crafts, as additions later on, further on down the road when the game, has released. What they could possibly add in as trade craft to further expand, the crafting population, and because that's definitely something that lacks in MMOs is. A lot of things, a lot of mechanics will be adjusted, added in, modified for the adventuring side of the game. And going by what VR said, with how involving crafting is going to be, we should also have a look at ways to expand on the whole crafting situation, what they could possibly do to add new challenges to the whole crafting game. And so that'll be next week on Friday, 6 PM Eastern. Vaad, it was a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me, man. This is a blast all the time.
Lex, you missed the end. All good. We will see you all basically next Friday, and I know I promised that I would have the information for the contest when we basically come back from break, but I'm going to be honest with you guys, this break has basically put me into a major setback. I'm still trying to catch up on all current events and things that are going on. I will have that contest ready for you next week, all the information that you need to enter the contest and how long it's going to last, and what your prizes are going to be will be revealed next Friday when we go into the show. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you all next time. Have a great evening.
Take care, everybody.
Have a great night.